Stories of Great Christians. From its radio studios in Chicago, the Moody Bible Institute greets its friends everywhere with Chapter 10 in the transcribed story of Florence Nightingale, the Lady with the Lamp. In 1852, Lady Lovelace composed a poem honoring Florence. It wasn't much of a poem, but it contained a significant prediction. In future years, should war's dread strife its victims claim, he who then reads these truthful rhymes will trace her progress to undying fame. For it was war that made a heroine of Florence Nightingale. In 1854, the Allied French and British were proceeding to the true purpose of the Crimean War, the destruction of the great Russian naval base at Sebastopol. The fighting was bitter, and if the losses were no heavier than in other wars, this time they were publicized. For the first time, a war correspondent accompanied the troops. Thus it happened that the terrible treatment of the wounded was revealed. There was sounded a cry against the careless sacrifice of human lives. On October 13th, 1854, a dispatch from correspondent Russell read,
"The wounded are left to die in agony unheeded. The men catch desperately at the surgeon as he makes his round, but are shaken off. Why must these soldiers die? Because it seems that the medical staff of the British Army has forgotten them, has even forgotten that old rags are necessary for the dressing of wounds."
England was aroused. Everywhere people were discussing the disgraceful situation. Old ladies who met in the marketplace.
There was talk about this big attack a month ago. Seems like the government should have had time to get the men some supplies.
Indeed. But they say the army was sent over without no hospital litters, nor cots, nor nothing.
Not even bandages, I hear.
It's shameful, that's what it is. My neighbor's boy went over, and she says if he had to die on the bare floor of some old barn, it would have been far better than...
Something ought to be done.
And something's got to be done.
People in all walks of life were stirred to action. They began to demand that nurses be sent to the Crimea to care for the wounded. Among those who were stirred by the challenge of this situation were Lady Forrester and a youthful hospital superintendent named Florence Nightingale. And in God's good providence, these two met together.
I came to see you, Miss Nightingale, because I've heard so much of your wonderful work here at the Harley Street Hospital. Oh, I knew that with your experience you would understand.
I'm thankful for the opportunities I've had, Lady Forrester.
If I could, I would go to the Crimea myself, but I only be in the way, and that brings me to my reason for coming to you. I'd like to furnish 3 nurses and pay all their expenses and send them out. That is, if you'll consent to take charge of the expedition.
Well, I've already been thinking seriously of going myself. And I do have a private income that would enable me to take at least 1 more nurse at my expense.
That makes 5. Not a big effort, but something to begin with. Something to give those poor soldiers hope.
It would all have to be arranged, of course.
I have friends who know Lord Stratford.
And I have a very dear friend who happens to be Secretary of War.
Sidney Herbert?
Yes. And I can't help wondering what Mr. Herbert is thinking about right now.
Well, the Times is after the War Department again, I see, Liz.
Yes, Sidney? What do they have to say this time?
Something with some justice to it. They say France sends women to the field to do a very creditable job of nursing. Why can't we English do the same thing?
Well, why can't we?
Well, it's not all so simple as that, Liz. In the first place, it's never been done before.
Not until my husband got to be Secretary at War.
And remember, he's Secretary at War. There's also a Secretary for War who bears responsibility.
But sending nurses to the Crimea isn't necessarily the duty of Secretary for War, is it? Especially if it's never been done before.
On the other hand, it's not necessarily my duty either.
Well, you know as well as I do that if it's to be done at all, somebody will have to assume the responsibility, and probably without being asked.
In my case, it looks like I'm already asked. By my darling wife, that is.
There, Sidney. You've been asked. You've accepted. It's all settled. Now, to get down to the business of who will go for us.
Liz, if everything in the War Department were accomplished with such speed and tact as you've displayed, miracles could be effected overnight.
Seriously, Sidney, the lives of literally thousands of soldiers are at stake. The need for nurses is desperate.
You're right, Liz. I shouldn't laugh. All of this went through my mind as I was reading the paper. I've come to a clear sense of duty about the thing. If it can be done, I'll do it. Within a month, I'll see to it that there are nurses at Scutari.
So it happened that I received a letter from Sidney Herbert. A letter mailed at almost the same time I sent his wife one. In his letter, he said,
I want to send a party of nurses to the Crimea, and I should like you to head the expedition. I can't urge you to take this position. You are the only person who can decide which of the many duties before you is most important. Still, I can't help saying that I believe the success or failure of this plan depends on you. You are the only person in England with the necessary skill and experience to make a go of the thing. Your rank and position in society give you an advantage that no one else possesses. I know you'll come to a wise decision. God grant that it may be in accordance with my hopes.
So I had to tell Lady Forrester that our little idea had been pushed aside by a much greater project. Sidney Herbert continued to communicate, and soon let me know that public opinion was forcing the government to act. Before accepting the post, I had to get release from the Harley Street establishment. But once again, it was Liz Herbert who intervened, writing from her home.
Dearest Flo, don't be a bit concerned about the committee. Just leave them to me. After the little speech about patriotic duty, etc., that I'm planning to make, I know they'll send you off with cheers.
I guess it's really not my place to ask Miss Nightingale, but I've been curious as to know how your family is taking all of this.
Well, they've been surprisingly cooperative, Mr. Herbert. I think they're impressed because this is also official. I'm being appointed by nothing less than the government itself.
Well, I'm thankful they're agreeable. And with that question off my mind, we can get to all of the details we have to take care of.
Such as?
Well, I'm planning, for instance, to leave the selection and employment of nurses completely in your hands. That is, if you've no objection.
Oh, when is it that I am to leave, Mr. Herbert?
I believe the date is set for the 21st.
In 6 days? Oh, it takes my breath away. I wonder if I'll have time to do it.
No, I don't in the least mind your appointing people to help you. All you have to do is to direct things.
Well, I think I can manage then. Now, let's see. How many nurses am I to take?
Oh, I think 60 or so.
60? Oh, no. Oh, Mr. Herbert, I couldn't possibly manage more than 20. I thought
Well,
perhaps...
you greatly underestimate your powers, Miss Nightingale.
Besides, I don't know whether I should say this or not, but even though there's so much talk about worthy ladies longing to rush off to the Crimea to serve as nurses, I can't help suspecting that it'll be very hard to find women who actually will go.
Oh, but in a place like London, a country like England, we must have 60 women who would be at least willing to go.
But how am I to get 60 women together and keep them in hand all the way to Crimea?
It is a problem. Still, the project is to attempt on a small scale. I'll compromise a bit, if you will. What do you say to 45 or 50?
Well, for the cause. I'll take my life in hands and raise it to 40. But more than that, I cannot be responsible for.
All right. You win the day. 40 it shall be. The wages you pay them, their hours, their housing, their passage, all of these things will be up to you.
Yes, sir.
We'll, by we I mean the War Department, will defray the expenses, of course. To start off, I'll ask Sir John, the Army agent, to deposit £1,000 to honor your drafts. Will that take care of initial expense?
Oh, I'm sure it will. I do things very economically.
I believe I've heard of your economies at Harley Street.
Sir, suppose one or more of my nurses gets disorderly. Am I to be allowed to send them home?
Certainly. Discipline must be maintained at all costs. And in this connection, I've intended to tell you that you, of course, will also be observing military regulations. You'll be working hand in glove with the authorities already out there.
Believe me, I'll do my utmost to see that everything is handled professionally.
I know you will. That's the one big reason why I wanted you to be the one to go.
One more thing. If you have no objections, Mr. Herbert, I'd like the nurses to wear uniforms. I want the Scutari nurses to be a new type, and a uniform can serve both as a protection and as a symbol.
Well, that seems quite reasonable. I've no objection whatever. But will you be able to get uniforms made before you leave?
Well, they may not be perfect fit for all, but I can get them made.
Ah. Now, one more thing, and I can let you go to begin the thousands of duties you will have charge of in the next 6 days. I've talked to the Bracebridges, Selina and Charles, and they say that they'll be happy to accompany you.
Oh, how good of them. And how kind of you to think of it, Mr. Herbert. I've loved the Bracebridges ever since we took the trip to Rome together. Oh, I know they'll be a great comfort to all of us in the days ahead. As I had feared, the matter of getting nurses was not so easy as rumor had it. We established quarters in Belgrave Square and offered to receive applicants there, but only a few straggled in to apply. Liz Herbert, who was interviewing for me, was discouraged.
Flo! Oh, I'm so glad to see you. I've been bored to tears sitting here all day.
Oh, but Liz, you must have had some applicants, haven't you? Whose names do I see in the papers?
Those two came this morning. No one else has been in all day. You should have seen them. One case is hopeless, a blousy, drunken sort, and the other would bear watching, it seemed to me. But you'd have to get help from someplace.
And what brought those two in?
Money. They heard we were paying twice the wages offered in the London hospitals.
Well, when the word gets circulated, we should have more applicants.
People are likely to complain about the women we select, Flo. But I wish they could see the kind of material we have to choose from.
Liz, one of the great underlying purposes I have for going to the Crimea is to build respect for nurses and the nursing profession. If I'm to succeed, we're going to have to introduce stronger and better character into the organization.
Well, everywhere you go, you hear that great ladies are volunteering by the dozens.
Mostly empty rumor, I fear.
Mm-hmm.
But this expedition is getting a great deal of publicity. And for the sake of the cause, it has to succeed.
Oh, Florence, I understand you completely. And I believe God will provide the nurses.
I know he will. Liz, this mission is impossible for me to undertake. I've known that from the start. But nothing is impossible for God. We must work, but we must trust him too. He can and will bring everything out right.
And so we conclude Chapter 10 in the transcribed story of Florence Nightingale, The Lady with the Lamp. This is another in the series of Stories of Great Christians, which come to you from the radio studios of the Moody Bible Institute in Chicago.